Michael Carter, a successful and self-assured young entrepreneur, took on a challenge he never expected would completely change his life. Michael was always a winner in every area, from his work to his personal life, and competition was always his driving force. One evening at a luxurious party in Los Angeles, his longtime friend David posed a bold challenge. David laughed loudly and said, "Let's see if you're brave enough to take on this challenge, Michael. I bet you wouldn't dare marry a woman who isn't your type of fat and unattractive woman." Michael, known for dating beautiful women, was taken aback, but he was always ready to prove himself. Raising an eyebrow, he asked, "So what's the prize?" David lifted his glass, smiling with a hint of mystery. $3 million for the winner. But you have to marry her and live with her for at least 8 months. Drawn in by the challenge and the enticing reward, Michael didn't hesitate and agreed immediately. The woman David had in mind was Valentina Roberts, someone who didn't fit the conventional standard of beauty, even plump. Michael didn't know her, so for him, this was simply a straightforward challenge. A few days later, he received more information about Valentina. She was confident, independent, and had a strong will completely different from the women he'd known, making him feel rather intrigued. Their first meeting took place in an upscale restaurant. When Valentina walked in, he immediately realized she was entirely different. She wasn't fazed by the glamorous setting or Michael's presence. Instead, she looked at him with a confident, determined gaze. "You're Michael Carter, aren't you?" Valentina said directly, taking a seat across from him. "And you're Valentina Roberts," Michael replied, extending his hand. She hesitated for a moment before shaking his hand, giving it a slight squeeze as if to convey her resolve. "No need to beat around the bush. I know why we're here," Valentina stated bluntly. "I know about the bet, the conditions, and the agreement." Michael was surprised by her directness, but he tried not to let his emotions show. "And yet you still agreed to meet me?" he asked, curious about her reasons. Valentina paused for a moment, then replied, "Let's just say I have my reasons." Their first meeting ended, leaving him with many thoughts. He realized that Valentina was unlike anyone he had ever met. She wasn't afraid of him or anything else, and that alone made him feel both curious and admiring toward her. The wedding day arrived. Michael, holding Valentina's arm, walked down the aisle confidently, though his eyes betrayed a hint of unease. Michael's guests, wealthy and powerful business people, immediately noticed the bride at his side. Silence fell over the room as all eyes turned to Valentina. The overweight woman, with her less than appealing appearance, quickly became a topic of lively discussion among the crowd. Whispers began to rise, their eyes filled with curiosity and disdain. They couldn't believe that Michael, a successful and attractive man, would choose someone like her. Smirks, mocking glances, and not so subtle ridicule passed through the crowd, with more than a few people beginning to mock him for his choice. Why would he choose her? One person even muttered, "Is he really in that much of a rush?" The skeptical and scornful questions only made the atmosphere heavier. Michael felt the dissatisfaction from everyone around him, but deep down, he knew one thing: he couldn't let this humiliation bring him down. Proud and arrogant, he understood he had staked too much on this bet, and if he didn't win, not only his honor but also his self-respect would be crushed. He had to win at all costs, regardless of the shame and whispers. Although Valentina wasn't the ideal woman in everyone's eyes, he was determined to complete the bet, as it was the only way to affirm his strength and power. The murmurs couldn't shake him. He forced himself to stay calm, smile, and continue walking beside Valentina, telling himself that everything would soon pass, and victory would ultimately be his. Right after the wedding, Michael took Valentina to his massive penthouse in downtown Los Angeles, a symbol of his wealth. The large windows reflected the city lights, and the interior was filled with the most luxurious items. After they began living together, Michael barely paid attention to Valentina due to her plump figure. At times, he looked at her with disdain, focusing only on her overweight appearance, completely ignoring her feelings. Valentina, on her part, was also indifferent toward Michael. Although they lived under the same roof, she kept her own private space and didn't let herself get drawn into his negative thoughts or attitudes. She was a remarkable woman, financially independent, not relying on anyone, and always disciplined. Every day, Valentina maintained the good habits she had cultivated for a long time, from exercising in the morning to keeping everything in the house neat and orderly. Even though Michael often looked at her with disdain because of her appearance, she didn't let it affect her life or her confidence. Valentina knew that with her independence and determination, she didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Michael frequently went out with beautiful and charming women, attending parties and drinking through the night without a single thought for Valentina. He left his plump wife at home, enjoying a luxurious life outside without once considering her feelings. These outings became a habit, and every time he returned, he treated her as though she were invisible in the empty house, continuing to indulge in his flashy, superficial relationships. But before long, he began to notice the special qualities of the wife he had previously overlooked. Valentina was an excellent cook and handled household chores meticulously and carefully. The meals she prepared were not only delicious but filled with warmth, making the home cozy and inviting. Michael started to feel curious, noticing a stark difference between Valentina and the beautiful women he typically spent time with. He began to see his wife in a new light, not just as a wife in a bet, but as a woman with real value. One day he was involved in a serious car accident and had to be hospitalized. When he regained consciousness, he found himself lying in the hospital, sore and exhausted. But what surprised him most was that Valentina, the woman he had once deemed unimportant, was the first person at his side. She took care of him tenderly, helping him with his medication, changing his clothes, and bringing him Parisian. Valentina's gentle and concerned gestures made Michael feel genuine care coming from her heart. Although he still felt frustrated about many aspects of their bet marriage, Valentina's attentive care gradually changed his perspective. He began to see her not just as a wife from a wager, but as a strong, patient, and affectionate woman. That feeling slowly transformed into admiration, an emotion he had never expected to feel for her. Even in his weakest moments, Michael started to realize that perhaps family and true love were what he had been missing all along. As time went by, within just 5 months, Valentina successfully lost weight and became more beautiful than ever. The noticeable changes in her appearance made it impossible for Michael to look away. She was not only slim but also exuded a captivating beauty he had never recognized before. He realized that she was no longer the person he once looked down upon. Determined to win her heart, Michael began doing everything he could to win over Valentina. He spared no expense, showering her with fresh bouquets, designer dresses, expensive handbags, and elegant high heels. He believed these lavish gifts would change her attitude, but every time he did so, Valentina ignored him, showing no excitement at all. One afternoon, when he brought her an exquisite handbag, Michael handed it to her with a hopeful smile. "Do you like this gift?" Michael asked, his eyes lighting up, eagerly awaiting her response. Valentina didn't look at him. She continued reading her book calmly, as if he wasn't even there. After a moment, she glanced at the bag and gently said, "Thank you, but I don't need these things." She placed the bag on the table and returned to her book, her demeanor unchanged. Michael felt a hint of anger flare up inside. He had put in so much effort to get her attention, but it was all in vain. She acts as if nothing matters, he thought, but instead of reacting immediately, he remained silent, feeling slightly disappointed. The next day, he bought a seductive red dress, something he was sure would catch Valentina's attention. He imagined her being delighted or at least touched. However, when he presented the dress to her, Valentina merely glanced at it and then responded calmly, "You can save it for someone else. I do not need for it." Michael couldn't hide his irritation. "Don't you feel anything?" he asked firmly. Valentina looked up, her gaze cold and piercing. "Don't try to change me, Michael. All I need is respect." He was silent for a moment, unsure of how to handle her indifference. Each gift he offered seemed useless, and her words only made him feel like a fool. However, the more she rejected him, the more Michael wanted to prove he could win her over. No matter how much Valentina ignored him, he was determined not to give up. At the same time, while his attempts to woo Valentina seemed futile, his life began to unravel. His business, the source of his pride and largest income, was on the verge of collapse. Major contracts he had worked on for years were suddenly and uncontrollably canceled. Partners withdrew one by one, and critical projects into which he'd poured all his energy suddenly fell apart. Michael felt confused and powerless. He had always prided himself on being a powerful, capable man in control of everything, but now he no longer felt that way. Calls from business partners, emails bringing bad news, everything seemed to crash down on him. He began to feel as though he was losing the control he had once taken so much pride in. One evening, sitting in his dim office, Michael started to reflect on everything. As his work life spiraled, he also noticed considerable changes in his personal life. It all seemed too coincidental. He began to suspect that perhaps his professional downfall was somehow connected to Valentina herself, the woman he had always looked down upon, but who now was the only unpredictable presence in his life. Michael decided to find out the truth. He knew that, although Valentina showed no interest in the gifts he gave her, there was something very different about her. She was not only an independent and resilient woman, but also had a mental strength he had never noticed before. He began to pay attention to small details like how Valentina always stayed calm in difficult situations, her wisdom, and her ability to make accurate decisions on financial matters he had previously ignored. One late night, as Michael sat in his study, he accidentally overheard Valentina's familiar voice from the living room. She was on the phone with someone, and although she tried to keep her voice low, something in the conversation made Michael stop and listen closely. He couldn't hear everything, but one sentence struck him deeply. "I will make him pay. He'll pay for what he did to my family." Michael felt a chill run down his spine. The strange feeling inside him grew stronger. He knew something was wrong, and as Valentina ended the call, he decided to confront her immediately. "Valentina, we need to talk," Michael said, his voice firm, no longer filled with sarcasm or distance as before. She looked up, unsurprised, as if she had been expecting this moment for a long time. "What do you want to talk about?" "About why you married me. About everything you've been hiding," Michael said, each word like a dagger straight to her heart. "What are you saying? Are you taking revenge on me?" She remained silent for a long moment, then finally sighed. "I didn't want you to feel like you were the only one being deceived. You probably thought I married you for money, for the luxury you provide, but that wasn't the real reason." Valentina stood up, her eyes filled with anger and tears. "My father was the director of a small company. He worked hard to build everything, but all he received was deceit and bankruptcy from you. You ruined his company and took everything away from him. My father was so devastated that he fell ill and eventually passed away. My mother couldn't bear it. She fell into debt and finally lost her sanity." Michael stood frozen, as if everything around him had suddenly collapsed. He couldn't comprehend what he was hearing, and this truth left him reeling. "You took everything from my family. While you live in luxury, my family had to beg, living in poverty. My mother lost her mind, and I was left with only one goal: revenge." Her voice choked up, each word like a dagger stabbing into his soul. "You are the one who used every trick to succeed, climbing to the top by trampling over others. You are the one who killed my family. I don't remember that, your father. Was revenge all you wanted?" Michael asked, his voice dropping, devoid of the coldness and arrogance it once held. "Yes, and I've done it," she nearly shouted. "You'll never understand how I feel, because you've never lost anything. All I wanted was justice." "Valentina, please stop, don't go any further." Michael's voice trembled, lacking the pride and confidence it once had. He stepped closer, raising his hand as if to hold her back, but her icy gaze made him freeze in place. "I'm begging you, don't do this. If you continue, I will lose everything. My career, my company, everything I've built will collapse. Don't you understand? You will destroy me." Valentina looked at him for a long moment, as if deciding whether to let him go or not. She continued, "Do you think I care about your career? You could lose everything, and I wouldn't care. But one thing I want you to understand is that I have endured immense pain, and I can't just watch you live in wealth without facing any punishment." Michael bowed his head. He couldn't deny the guilt and regret he felt. Everything Valentina had said was true, but he couldn't let himself fail. If he lost her, he would lose everything. He had invested too much in this life to let it all go to waste. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, his voice choked. "I'll do anything, just please don't destroy me. I'll change. Give me a chance." Valentina looked at him, her gaze conflicted, but she didn't answer right away. She simply stood there in silence, allowing Michael to feel the tension in the air. Each minute passed as if it were a long, drawn-out year. Michael looked into Valentina's eyes, his face filled with determination but also pain. He felt deep guilt for what he had done in the past. The decisions he thought were right but had destroyed the lives of so many families, including hers. He couldn't let that continue. He had to change, not only to save his marriage but to make amends for the harm he had caused to innocent people. "Valentina, I will do everything I can to make up for my mistakes. I promise to compensate the other families affected by my business dealings. Everything I've done wrong, I will make it right. I won't let it continue. You may not believe me now, but I'll prove to you that I can change." Valentina remained silent for a long moment, then finally sighed. "You'll have to prove it, Michael. These promises mean nothing unless you truly act. And I'll be watching you every step of the way." Michael nodded, determination clear in his eyes. "I'll do everything to show you that I can change. Don't doubt me anymore, Valentina. I won't let you down." They stood there saying nothing more, but the atmosphere between them had shifted. Valentina knew the road ahead would be full of challenges, but at least he had begun to understand some of the pain she had endured, and perhaps only his true transformation could save everything. And then the final day of the bet arrived, and Michael felt the tension rising within him. Over the past 8 months, he had faced countless challenges, but it seemed that everything had changed. He had changed, and so had his feelings for Valentina. He no longer saw her as part of a wager, but as a remarkable woman he loved. Michael knelt, his eyes full of sincerity and seriousness. "Valentina, I know I can't change the past, but I want to make amends. I want to make everything better. I want to spend the rest of my life doing that. Will you be my wife?" Valentina looked at him, and the pain in her heart resurfaced. She remembered everything that had happened. She looked at him, not with hatred, but with deep sadness. "Michael, I can't," she said, her voice gentle yet firm. "Though I can't deny the feelings I have, I can't forget what you did. My father died because of your cruelty. My mother is now lost in madness because of what you did to my family. You can't change what happened, and I can't forget it." Michael stood still, his eyes filled with regret and disappointment. "Valentina," he whispered, but she didn't let him continue. She turned away, walking out of the house without looking back at him. Each step she took seemed to shatter Michael's heart even more. It was at that moment he realized that no matter how much he changed, the wounds he had caused wouldn't heal easily. As the door closed, he stood alone, watching her leave in heartache. Michael understood that he had to change, let go of his arrogant ego, and learn to live responsibly, and to succeed in business without stepping on others. And most importantly, he had finally realized the meaning of a true family: not money, power, or business deals, but love, care, and sacrifice.